Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Politics Today. And in this programme today, we're going to give a school test to our new Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, who this week has marked 100 days in office. Has he passed or has he failed? That is the verdict. And in this programme today, I'm joined by Reverend Chris Wickland from the Living Word Church in Farnham and Melanie Symonds, the editor of Heart newspaper. So welcome to you both. And I'll start off with you, Melanie. So it's good to have you back on the programme, and I can see that you've got a new edition of Heart newspaper out. So do you want to share with us a little bit about the front page story you've got there?
Yes, it's an amazing testimony about, in fact, this the man in the story is already using it, the paper's outreach on the streets. It's very powerful. He was into all sorts of stuff, and then Jesus radically saved him.
Wonderful.
And then we've got other stories about, do we have free speech in Britain? We've got a report on the Scottish COVID inquiry and the misuse of midazolam, and other highlights.
Very good. So we don't want to ruin the intrigue. So the viewers, if you want to know what's in Melanie's newspaper, you can get a copy through her website, which is heartpublications.co.uk. And great to see you back on the programme, Chris. Do you want to give us a little bit of an update on what you've been involved in regarding your ministry? I know that there's an exciting Hollywood Christian film that you star in that's coming out next summer. Big blockbuster.
Yeah, it is quite a big budget film. Yes, so that's coming out in summer next year. It'll start in America and it'll be streamed everywhere. Other stuff I've been doing, I've been generally not keeping myself well behaved. I've been in all kinds of places, everything from like protest marches for Britain and seeing what's going on there.
And Melanie, as a journalist and as a teacher as well, do you want to share your thoughts on Keir Starmer's first 100 days in office, which is marked this week, and your thoughts on him and this new Labour government?
Yes, well, in the old days, reports were just one word or one grade, but when I was a teacher, they made it much harder work, and you had to mark them on 4 elements, so I've done that. So the first element you have to mark him on is effort. So I've actually given them A for effort. I'm sure they're trying very hard. Now, we then
to mess the country up. Anyway, carry on.
You don't. These reports take time, and so then content. I've given them D or E, because I think that their legislative programme is ghastly. Then behaviour, their behaviour in lessons, C or D, we're really not very happy with some of what they've got up to. And the presentation of their work, D, they don't seem to have anyone good to present it all.
So that's a fail. Chris, what are your thoughts on this political milestone that Keir Starmer has reached, which is the first 100 days in office, which is usually an indicator as to the direction that any new government will head in after the first 100 days. And this gives us a real insight into what we can expect from the rest of this parliamentary office that Starmer has another four years to run.
Yeah, so I'd sum it up in 2 words: sleaze and nepotism. In fact, I've got a list here that's so great, I had to write it down. So we've had, what have we got? Various U-turns, trying to get back into the EU again, taking away winter heating payments, sleaze with free-geared Keir, 2-tier justice, a denial of the issues of immigration, his worrying concern about nationalism, which I thought was crazy, heavy-handed prosecution of social media posts, infighting and backfighting within his own party and stuff. So, been a good 100 days, really.
Yeah. And Melanie, the Daily Telegraph has described Starmer's first 100 days in office as being tumultuous. And they say in the past 3 months have actually been dominated, as Chris was saying, by a sleaze scandal, race riots and international drama, particularly in the Middle East.
Yes. So, yes, it's not... and could it get any worse? Yes, it could. I actually wrote this down before I came up today, and I said it could get worse if a prominent figure's private life was exposed as scandalous. I think that's about the only thing that hasn't happened. And we don't know, what will happen. The Lord is in the business of exposing. I don't know whether... If one was a Labour supporter, if you were one of the people who'd been standing at the entrance of Downing Street who had been bussed in and stood there with their flags and etc., how would one now feel? So, I mean, I don't know. I looked at the Sunday Times report, and they've actually asked the public. They've done a couple of polls, and the public was asked what are the biggest failures of the new government, and they said removing the winter fuel allowance. 49% thought that was the worst. I mean, that's been spectacularly badly handled, really badly handled. Releasing some prisoners early to ease overcrowding in prisons, 32%, not reducing illegal immigration, 22%, not resolving the issues with the NHS, and that was 18%. So you couldn't fix the NHS in the first 100 days, but I'm not sure what is actually being done. I mean, the bill which has been prioritised, apparently it's got the most publicity, is assisted dying. And this is absolutely awful. Or rather, as Maureen Martin's got a piece in the New Heart paper called it, assisted suicide, because it's almost the end of civilization. It's so awful. Now, Keir Starmer came into office saying that they were going to rebuild Britain, but no one asked him to. And in whose image is he rebuilding it? I mean, it looks like tearing down and destroying.
That's a good question, very much so. And Chris, when Keir Starmer was leader of the opposition, we had this shadow cabinet. The one thing that he did more than anything was to attack the Conservative ruling party, particularly Boris Johnson, over the whole issue of kind of sleaze. And yet now we see within 100 days, his party has been having the same problem of having to tackle with moral ethics and sleaze and sheer competence. And just share with us the damaging impact that this sleaze scandal regarding receiving money for designer clothes and glasses is literally having on his administration and his government.
Yeah, well, you know, the pun of free glasses, all this has produced bad optics for him. In the sense that he's now received over, they believe, about £100,000 in various gifts and sort of perks and privileges and things. I remember him saying, this is not an exact quote, but you know, he said something along the lines, it'll be good to get the boys out of Downing Street and get the men in, and you know, we'll do away with sleaze and we'll bring in a government that will have none of this and none of that. And they're guilty. Not only are they guilty of doing it, but they're guilty of doing it to a record degree. In a sense, he's outstripped every other prime minister, I believe, and the amount of gifts and things that he's had. So whichever way you want to paint this or make this look, it just looks really bad. And I think one thing that the general public cannot stand is hypocrisy. You know, when we look to a government, we do expect a degree of higher standard from those that are in high office. And now when we see those claiming to come in and producing a higher standard and actually find they're even lower standard than the ones that came before, I don't think that's very good. And I think this is one of the things that's really damaged them. Could they come back from it? Well, yeah, if they manage to clean up their act a bit. But I just think, as we've seen so much bumbling and fumbling in the last 100 days, I think we've got a clear indicator of what's to come, really. But I think it's going to get a lot worse. Because I'm an optimist, and it can always get worse.
And Melanie, so people working in the public sector and businesses cannot receive free gifts. So why is it that this government, and particularly Keir Starmer himself, can actually receive gifts of up to £32,000 for designer glasses and suits? And also we think that Angela Rayner and also Rachel Reeves as well, have they totally misread the public mood on this one? Because there is a sense that this government has their entitlement to this, that they deserve to be in office, that they deserve these expensive designer clothes and glasses. They deserve to be able to take from the public because they're in power.
There is that sense, and it is very surprising that it hasn't been better handled. But I want to say a couple of things. One is we're making an awful fuss about suits and glasses because I suppose they sort of didn't own up and because it was hidden. It is actually a very British thing. There are much worse corruption in other countries. But it's actually almost a positive thing that we get so worked up about suits and glasses, which aren't a huge amount of money. But I think what is particularly bothering people at the moment...
Okay, well, 32,000 on suits and designer glasses is quite a bit of money.
But compared to, say, the sort of level of corruption, you know, in China, officials will pay for ordinary people will pay for an official's child's school fees if they want something. That's what I've heard. It's that kind of thing. So That's one thing. The other thing is that I think what really annoys the public, though, is what you said about the entitlement and the privilege and these tickets to Taylor Swift's concerts and the VIP police escort for Taylor Swift. That's what bothers me, that annoys me. I, the taxpayer, paying for a pop star's VIP police escort just shows...
So that they could get tickets for the concert.
But apparently, who knows why? But you know, apparently her mother said we're going to cancel London if we don't have a VIP police escort. So she's had the same police escort as royalty would have, and the Met had to kind of square that with their conscience. But going back to what Chris was saying, it is about the optics, and they haven't had an Alistair Campbell to keep them in order.
No spin doctors.
I mean, yes, they haven't had a good spin doctor and advise on the optics of it all. So they've now got a new man, James Lyons. I'm just reading this from the Sunday Times. He was Director of Communications at NHS England and then TikTok's Head of Policy Communications for Europe. He's heading up a new Number 10 Strategic Communications team. He is also a former Sunday Times journalist. He's understood to have met Sue Gray before her departure. He's been working with Labour during its first weeks in office. Now, that hasn't been very effective, so he's expected to take over the Number 10 grid and oversee the list of media-worthy announcements that the government intends to make, and he will try to fill the vacuum that led to weeks of negative headlines. I mean, they've been in opposition for ages. They're supposed to have this slick team. Why weren't they managing the media in the same way that Blair and Campbell did?
Yeah. And Chris, I think Melanie does allude to something very important, and the Daily Telegraph this week has also really focused on this. And this is this power struggle that we see at the heart of the administration in Number 10, really a control for power between Sue Gray, Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff, and then according to my notes here as well, up against Morgan Sweeney, who is the political liaison for Starmer, and these two have been at loggerheads, which has slowed down the operation of government. And according to some reports, it says here that Sue Gray, for example, had to sign off on every decision that Starmer made and sign off for herself. So the question is, was Sue Gray, actually running the government rather than the Starmer? And it just gives this whole impression that on the whole wheels of government have been slowing down.
Yeah, so that whole Sue Gray incident was quite interesting. You know, she was often joked as being the best paid pensioner in Britain and things, and obviously she was earning more money than the Prime Minister, which again is I guess not good optics either. The whole thing, as I was reading in the paper today, it's just dysfunctional government, and as a member of the public, you know, when I look to the government, I need to know that I've got a parliament that's running effectively. I need to know they've got a government that every government will have its problems and its foibles, but you want to make sure that those guys at the top are actually working well together and getting things done. But this is, to me, it's all kind of petty about power grabbing and who's the boss and who's doing this and who's doing that. And we got bigger issues, and these big issues are the things that the government seems to be living in denial of. So, for example, the issue of immigration is such a major issue, but they don't want to face it. In fact, I saw a headline this week saying we now face another 8 years of uncontrolled immigration. And the public are saying, we want this dealt with. But his argument is you're racist, or his argument is if you're nationalist, you're a problem. So they've come out, I don't know if you saw him on his speech and his podium, was about rebuilding the foundations. What he means by that is that he needs to change how the likes of you and I think, because if we're nationalists, there's something wrong with us, where we need to be globalist, we need to be open border policy, we need to be liberal, we need to be woke. And he doesn't like anything that's contrary to that. And so anything that's right of Stalin is basically right-wing thuggery. And so this is the problem that we have, and we have a government that's in complete denial about the state of affairs. And so where this goes from here, I think is going to be written into our history books, and we're going to look back and go, wow, do you remember when Labour were in power? And everybody will remember.
And what are your thoughts on the fact that Sue Gray had to resign as Chief of Staff primarily because of leaks and discourse we saw and disconnect between different various personalities in 10 Downing Street who are supposed to be running the country. And so therefore it hasn't helped Starmer, has it, with these big massive leaks. The fact that Sue Gray's salary was actually leaked to the press as well, indicating that she was on more money than Starmer himself, didn't actually go down very well with the public. So share with us how, in order to actually make the best of government and to be effective and efficient, squabbling over personalities and power struggles seems as something we wouldn't actually see under Tony Blair and New Labour.
No, we wouldn't have done, but I'm actually thinking back to Boris Johnson's number 10. We had all that fuss about Dominic Cummings, and he was sort of hanging around the place when Boris first got in, and he was sort of set up against the head of the civil service, or the cabinet secretary. There was bad blood there, and there was no secrets about what was going on. So it's somewhat more of the same, but I have to say I feel slightly sorry, if that's a word, for Sue Gray, because I think she's had more flack because she's a woman. I've seen this kind of thing before. She's actually been probably acting as Keir Starmer's gatekeeper, and because and if a man does that, he's doing his job, he's being strong and effective and authoritative. But it's a woman, so she's being a control freak and tiresome, and they've ganged up on her. That's how it comes across to me.
I think it goes deeper than this, primarily because Sue Gray was one of the leading civil servants in the country, which means that she's supposed to be impartial. She was the one that was commissioned to write the COVID inquiry, looking into the kind of Boris parties during the COVID-19 lockdowns and what have you. Then she swapped sides and then has joined Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, and then became his chief of staff. So when people look at the civil service, they expect the civil service to be politically neutral and impartial, which shows that she wasn't. And the fact is then we have all this controversy surrounding her, is pretty much where it all comes from, because the British public and certainly the media and the press don't like the fact that here is a civil servant being chief of staff when she came from the civil service and she's supposed to be neutral and have that impartiality.
Well, it was an odd appointment, but there's a lot of background to her which is very interesting, because she was a high-flying civil servant, and then she went to be a pub landlady on the Irish border, Northern Ireland, Southern Ireland. Now, you don't tell me she was just being a pub landlady. I think she was actually got some very deep state connections. She probably knows where a lot of bodies are. And what's even more interesting, one assumes she married an Irishman, because her son, Liam Conlon, is MP for Penge now. So he's obviously, they're a Labour family. He's a Labour MP for Penge. So this is extremely interesting. I'd love to know more, but I don't think one ever will. But I just want to say one more thing about Sue Gray. Yes, I agree with what you said. It didn't look right for her to go being 1 minute doing the impartial COVID inquiry and then becoming Keir Starmer's chief of staff. He should have picked someone else.
Yeah. And the thing with the dead bodies, that's speculation. We can't verify. I
didn't say dead bodies.
Oh, okay. Okay, let's moving on. We're going down a few rabbit holes here. Chris, in terms of Keir Starmer's popularity, so when he won the general election back in early July, we're looking at approval rates of 70%. Now they have dropped down to 36%. What does that tell us about Keir Starmer's perception to the general public and how they feel about him?
Well, I think, with the winter fuel cuts to the pensioners, that wasn't a good thing. I can see the nuance in that. It should be means tested, some people were saying, but that's just really bad politics, I guess. But then other things about how he handled the riots that went on. And again, we had the whole issue of two-tier policing, where it looked like the Palestinian marches could pretty much get away with whatever. But when the so-called right-wing thugs turned up, and I know they were violent, so yeah, they had to be punished for that, and that's fair enough. But then equally, the Palestinians were defacing monuments and various things, and police were doing nothing. I remember when we had From the River to the Sea blazoned across Big Ben, and no one did anything about it. So that didn't go down well either. Also, things like Keir trying to do things where he wants MPs not to have a second job. So, for example, we've got various presenters on GB News who are politicians or ex-politicians. That would silence them. And so it just looks like I'm not saying he is, but it looks like he's a bit of a control freak, wants things done his way, doesn't like the opposition, doesn't like dealing with the big questions that the culture is saying. We need to deal with immigration. He gets all funny about that when people ask him the question, and he's in denial. So I can see quite quickly why he's gone down in popularity. He's done so many things which are unpopular with the public, and he's not listening to the public. And he's not being nuanced with how he's dealing with the public, especially when you have police that are arresting people for thought crime by putting probably inappropriate thoughts, but putting thoughts on Facebook and then get sent to prison for 4 months because of their opinion about certain things. I think is a very dangerous narrative, a very dangerous direction for us as a nation to go down. So I can see quite clearly that he's not very popular, and as I said before, I'm an optimist. I can see things getting a lot worse.
And Melanie, when it comes to the economy as well, the constant since the Labour Party took power, they've been blaming the Conservatives. They keep talking down the economy. They keep talking down the nation, which is not building up business confidence needed for investment. But also they keep mentioning, particularly Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, keeps mentioning there's a 20 billion black hole in the government's finances. So the big question is that actually true, or is this the costs that the Labour Party put together in their election manifesto and then got into government and realised that money isn't there? So of course there's all speculation that we're now going to have to pay higher taxes to come up with this extra 20 billion spending haul that the Labour Party can go on.
Well, as of this morning, apparently it's leapt. It's now 40 billion. It was 22 was the figure being bandied about. Now it's 40 that the Tories have lost down the back of the sofa. Now, we have an Office for Budget Responsibility. Someone must know the answer. We've got all these civil servants being paid to sit there on their calculators and do clever things. Why does no one actually know? So they are coming into government and saying we've got a 40 billion black hole, but what were the civil service doing all of a sudden? What was the Office for Budget Responsibility doing? It really concerns me the way that they are wanting to spend money. There's going to be the money available to give Ed Miliband a shiny new, what's it called? Great British Energy Department. And I think, oh yes, one of the holes, or so whatever the holes in the ground, where they're going to put the carbon dioxide or something, that's going to be, sorry?
The carbon emissions. The
carbon emissions, yes. So that's going to cost about, a handy 20 or 22 billion.
Yeah, well.
Put air in the ground.
Plant trees, that might do the same job.
Yeah, well, they haven't thought about that. You need to be in number 10. But Chris, the other issue I think we need to talk about really as well is this incredible number of prisoners that this government has released. I know that there is a problem with prison overcrowding, but the fact is that so many prisoners have now been released to deal with that overcrowding has not gone down well with the public, and it also means that our streets are now less safer than they were before.
Yeah, but he didn't do that for the sake of overcrowding. He did it so that he'd get rid of them, get some out of prison to make space for the right-wing thugs that he wanted to put in prison. And so that was really the whole kind of thinking behind that. And it, to be fair to him, it did work. It did stop a lot of the nationalists in their tracks. Like, man, if I even post something, I could go to prison for this. So it did work in the sense of a heavy-fisted fear tactic, but that was pretty much reason why he did it, so that he could make room for all the right-wing thugs to go into prison. And that was another thing that didn't go down well, because again, he didn't have his finger on the pulse of the mood of our culture in Britain right now. We are in a time of cultural flux. We've got such an influx of immigration that it's causing us to lose our identity. And if they don't pick up on this quick enough, there will be more riots, there will be more trouble, and there will be uprising in this nation. And he has to see that coming, and he has to do something. And this heavy-handed, heavy-fisted, let's ignore the British people, I think is a very dangerous approach.
Yeah, and we have 3 minutes left of the programme, so I need to bring in the way that the Labour Party, particularly David Lammy, is handling the profile of being our Foreign Secretary. So when it comes to Israel, we've seen that he has announced his opposition to the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli Defense Minister to be taken to the International Criminal Court in The Hague to face alleged war crimes, and putting a moral comparison between Hamas and Israel on the same level. We've also seen that he has refunded UNRWA, the United Nations Relief Works Agency, to the sum of 21 million pounds, which is our taxpayers, knowing that this organisation, members of this organisation, are members of Hamas and took part in the worst massacre in Israel's history. And then we've also seen, for example, as other examples of this as well, as also suspending arms shipments to Israel as well. And now they want to attack some what they call right-wing extreme settlers as well. So clearly, this government is picking a fight with Israel, which spiritually is never a good news.
No, well, it's Genesis 12:3, isn't it? And I'm actually just wondering if we will see a repeat of 1973, when Edward Heath wouldn't allow American planes to refuel in Britain. They ended up refueling in Portugal on their way to help Israel in the Yom Kippur War, and his government didn't last long. And that is our consolation, that if they don't bless Israel, they will not be blessed.
Absolutely. And Chris, also show us how it's righteousness that exalts a nation, and how by putting the people first and actually introducing righteous legislation, then that's how a nation is blessed. Also, a nation is blessed if they stand with Israel and the Jewish people.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree. Any nation that stands with Israel is blessed. And as a nation, if we have good, godly laws, then we can see throughout history, not just in our own nation, but in other nations where God blesses them. So to me, especially as a pastor, it's a bit of a no-brainer. We do need godly government, and we do need to be standing with Israel, more so at this time on the precipice of potential Third World War than any other time in history.
Excellent. So Melanie and Chris, thank you so much for being my guests on this week's edition of Politics Day. And the big question remains, has Keir Starmer and this new Labour government passed their school test, or have they failed? That's a decision I think you're going to have to make. But we certainly need to pray regarding this government, because the scriptures command us to pray for those in authority, that we may live peaceful lives. And clearly we're not living peaceful lives at the moment, living this time of political and social chaos. So thank you for watching this week's edition of Politics Today.